Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and I lost no time in diving into the Simon Says Stamp June 2018 card kit. So I took all 4 pieces of cardstock that come in the kit, and I am cutting them in half lengthwise, and I'm cutting 2 sheets at once using my big Tonic Tim Holtz guillotine trimmer here. So I will have 4 pieces of cardstock that are 4 1/4 by 11 inches. And technically I could have done 8 cards because everything's cut here if I'd wanted to. But I only did 4 today. And I started off, and like it says in the video, I'm doing 4 cards and then I'm giving 2 options to step it up. Because as usual, I couldn't leave well enough alone and had to add to it. But what I do with just the heat embossing, you totally could leave as is. Yeah, that's why I went with 4 cards, because I couldn't decide what color of heat embossing I wanted to use. The large stamp that's in the Beautiful Flowers stamp set, I just thought it would look beautiful, heat embossed with metallic embossing powders. So I have all 4 of my card bases. They're all A2 sized, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And then I pulled out my Tim Holtz travel stamp platform. And then I have 4 different metallic embossing powders from Simon Says Stamp. I have the silver, the gold, the antique gold, and the rose gold. And I wanted to do a different color of embossing powder on each different color card base. And I was curious too to see how they would look with the different colors and the different metallic embossing powders. So because this stamp is huge, and when I did my unboxing, which I'll link to at the end of this video, the stamp is enormous, as you can see. What I ended up doing was actually pulling out my MISTI creative corners, and I lined up the bottom corner of the little creative corner there with the top ridge of the line that's on the bottom of the stamp platform. If you have a stamp platform, you'll know what I'm talking about. It kind of curves down, and then where it curves up, that's where I lined up that creative corner. This way I can line up all my card bases and do all these multiples and not have to fiddle so much with aligning. You do it the first time and then you're good. So I removed the creative corner. I have my stamp on the lid of my platform, and then I'm inking up the stamp with Simon's clear embossing ink and stamping it multiple times because, again, huge stamp. There's so much detail to it. So I wanted to make sure I got all that detail before I pour over my embossing powder. Now, I'm using 4 separate coffee filters as well. I've mentioned this in other videos. I like to keep a coffee filter per color if I'm doing multiple colors of embossing so that I don't contaminate my embossing powders. And that also works really well with this because I end up embossing the sentiments and the insides as well. So this kept it simple by I just moved my coffee filters kind of off camera, but I kept them for each color so that I don't end up getting, gold in my silver and et cetera, et cetera. So this first one, I'm using the new PEACOCK cardstock that Simon released with this kit. I love this. I need to order like 5 packs of it. I really love this color. So I used silver embossing powder on that one. And then I put my creative corner back into my platform in the same spot. And then this one, I'm using the smoke cardstock. And again, inking up the stamp with the clear embossing ink, stamping it, making sure I get all the areas of this stamp stamped onto this cardstock. And then with this smoke cardstock, I'm using Simon's rose gold embossing powder, which it goes on when it's just powder before you melt it. It's very red looking. And then when you melt it, it's not so much rose gold to me. It's more of like a really gorgeous copper, like a deep copper. It's just so pretty. And on gray, I was so happy. I think this one ended up being my favorite. I loved this color. I don't reach for this embossing powder very often. I need to do a swatch of it like on the container so that I can remind myself that it doesn't really look red. Harder to see on camera. It still kind of looks more red, but when the light hits it, it is just the most gorgeous color ever. So I'm just going to go along and keep doing this process of lining up the card base in my platform, stamping this image with the clear embossing ink, and then embossing it with metallic embossing powder. So, and between each one too, I'm putting the embossing powder back into the container and putting the lid on so I don't knock these over. So I did, lined up my creative corner again, and then this time I'm using the CORNFLOWER cardstock, getting that lined up, and then I'm going to heat emboss this one with Simon's gold embossing powder. This was another favorite. I liked all of them. This is also why I did 4, because I could never make up my mind, decide, which one I would want to do. So stamp this with the clear embossing ink. I'm going to coat this with gold embossing powder. And all of these embossing powders are fine detail embossing powders, which is perfect for an image like this. So it picked up a lot of that detail and didn't end up being, you know, lumpy or anything like that. So like I said, I used the gold embossing powder for this one, and then I'm going to end up using antique gold on the white cardstock. And antique gold is more, it's a bit more of a warmer gold, whereas just the gold is more of like a true gold, not quite brassy, but just more of a true gold. And then the antique gold is definitely more kind of like a warmer vintage sort of a color, which I really like too. So each one, I let my heat tool heat up for a few seconds before bringing it to the cardstock, and then get it completely melted. I'll funnel the embossing powder back into the container and then go on to the next card. And like I said, I could have done 8 easily, because then I could have just really done 2 at a time, and it wouldn't have taken me that much more time. But of course, hindsight's always 20/20. And I was more concentrated on just trying to get these done and made, because like I said, I was using the stamps and cardstock, etc. from the June kit. However, this kit is going to sell out. I was just watching a live video that Simon Says Stamp just did, and this kit is like flying off the shelves. Ones like this always sell out quickly. However, if you're watching this down the road, I do link to everything separately as well. So this stamp set is already available separately. The cardstock, the envelopes, the embossed powder, everything will be linked in the description box below the video, as well as on my blog, which is also linked directly below the video. So like I said and I'm just keeping things mostly simple. Well, I am in the beginning, and then I'm going to add more to it. But this stamp especially is just, I've been seeing samples by other team members, and, you know, the watercoloring and everything. It's just fabulous. And I'm going to have to do a bunch of that too with this, but I really wanted to keep this mostly about just heat embossing it, because it's just gorgeous. I'm seriously obsessed with the stamp. I think it's beautiful. So after I did my final card base here, so this is the white with the antique gold, I'm going to put this back into my stamp platform and line up a sentiment. I could have done this at the beginning and done all this in one step. And again, hindsight, this is what I would normally do. Obviously, the sentiment would have been moved up a bit more, because I could have stamped both stamps at the same time, no problem. But I originally was planning on stamping sentiments separately on like black cardstock, you know, heat embossing it, cutting it, adding it, etc. And ended up changing my mind afterwards and decided to stamp the sentiment directly onto these card bases and just keep it simple. So I'm just inking up the stamp again with the clear embossing ink, stamping it onto the card, and then using the exact same embossing powder to heat emboss on all of that. So I just redo the process. Let's do card with the embossed powder, go on to the second one, third one, fourth one, keeping it just simple. So after I finish the final card with the sentiment on the outside, I'm going to pull more sentiments from the stamp set and line them up onto the inside of the card. There's another thing I'd said in the unboxing video, how much I love this set, because there's a bunch of buildable sentiments in it too, because it's a big set. It's one of the 6x8 stamp sets. So you've got the great big huge stamp, plus other flower stamps, plus a ton of sentiments. It's just fabulous. So I lined up the stamps on the inside to create my sentiment, and then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to stamp and heat emboss all of the sentiments on the inside of all 4 cards using the same embossing powder that I used throughout. So then once I'm done this last step on the inside, these are technically done. I was technically done with heat embossing, but then I ended up doing the envelopes at the end because, again, afterthought. So going through, and thankfully I hadn't got rid of my coffee filters before that point. I still had them sitting on my desk. So this is where you could technically leave these as is. I think they're just gorgeous. You could do all 8. You could do tons more with different colors of cardstock, whatever floats your boat. But I wanted to play some more, and I couldn't leave them alone. So I pulled out my Fine Tech Pearlescent Colors watercolor palette that I just absolutely love. There are many other options out there. There's a Prima palette that is much more affordable, because these Fine Tech ones are very pricey. They're so worth it, but they are pricey. So there is a Prima palette that the Prima Metallic palette is really great, as well as the Kirtaki Gonzai Tombi Starry colors would work very well as well, which is, I think, like half the price of this one. But I do love this Fine Tech one. So all I did was activate the color, and I'm using my big silver size 8 watercolor brush and very lightly painting it onto the flowers. I'm not filling it in. I'm just kind of lightly painting it. And then I'm going to use a little thicker concentration of like more pigment, less water. And I'm just scraping that off the brush onto just one of my acrylic stamping blocks here. And then I'm going to flick the brush against the edge of my acrylic block and create a bit of a splatter. So I'm going to splatter that same color onto this card base. And then I'm going to set this aside to dry. And I'm going to do the exact same thing on the 3 other cards, just using one of the metallic colors that's similar to the embossing powder, just to kind of keep it all sort of consistent. So I use the silvery whitey color for the silver heat embossing, and then for my gray cardstock with the rose gold, which like I said, to me looks like copper, I use that reddish kind of copper color of the metallic palette there, and same thing, just lightly painted it on, keeping it more towards like, you know, the center or the, you know, bottom areas of the petals and the leaves, etc. And then adding some to my acrylic block and adding that splatter. So after I did that one with the white card with the antique gold, there's that more antique gold looking sort of embossing powder. This one was a little different. I wasn't sure how the watercolor would show up because these look much better on darker color cardstocks, but it still looked really nice on the white. It was just, I needed to fiddle with it a little bit more to make it look the way I wanted it. And then splatter that, set it aside to let it dry for a few minutes. And then with the blue one, of course, using the gold, which is my favorite from this palette, and painting that on and then adding the splatter. So this was one step up. You know, you could add this and again be done. Or what you could just add splatter with Copic Opaque White, which was my first thought. Or Black Soot Distress Paint. That was my second thought. And then instead I went with the Finetec palette instead. So you could leave that as is. I think it would look fabulous. But again, I took another step up and pulled out a whole bunch of my Tonic Nouveau crystal drops because I can't not, and I'm totally obsessed with them again. So I pulled out a bunch. All of the cards I used the black and this ivory seashell and just very liberally sprinkled them throughout my card here. So when I use these, I can be a lot more liberal than, you know, you could glue on jewels that would look gorgeous, or sequins. I tend to be a bit more conservative, although I know I use a lot in some people's opinions, which it's kind of just personal preference how many you like to use. But I find with the Nouveau drops, I can be more liberal with them because it's harder to tell how much you're using up. Whereas with the jewels, I just like to hoard them because, you know, they're pretty and sparkly. So anyway, all of them, I use the ebony black and the ivory seashell. And then for each metallic embossing powder, I pulled out a Nouveau drop that was similar. So of course, for this silver one, I used silver lining Nouveau drops. And then for the white card with the antique gold embossing powder, I didn't have a gold in the, like, Nouveau drops don't have a color that's similar to that, but the honey gold glitter drops are very similar. So that's what I used with this one. And again, very liberal with them, different sizes, adding just larger dots and smaller dots and just kind of spreading it out, but keeping it closer to the image. So adding all of that, and again, setting each one of these aside to dry overnight so that I don't, you know, wreck them or anything like that. And they need a good, technically 24 hours to dry. So then with the blue card and the gold embossing, I used bright gold Nouveau drops. That one was a very close match in my opinion. So went along, added the black, added the ivory seashell, and then added the gold sprinkled liberally throughout this. And I also really like if you just barely touch the applicator to your card and you get like tiny, tiny, tiny little almost like specks of the Nouveau drops. So that's something I don't do very often, but I actually really like the look of it. It's more just habit to really squeeze it out and basically create your own enamel dots. But if you just add the tiniest little dabs, you can get the cutest little, like, just very little tiny, tiny, almost like pinhead dots. So with the final one, with this rose gold, the copper penny Nouveau drops matched really, really well. So that was like all the steps up with these. Let them dry overnight. And then when I pulled them out this morning, everything's dry and I'm looking at them and I'm like, I really like them. I like how they turned out, but they need envelopes. So the kit comes with a metallic cornflower blue and a metallic white envelope. And then from my stash, I pulled out one of the metallic copper envelopes from Simon, which was perfect. And I pulled out this like teal colored envelope that I honestly am not sure where it came from. I pulled it out and used it, and honestly, I regret it. It doesn't match the Simon's Peacock cardstock at all. If I was to redo everything, I would use a Simon's metallic silver envelopes. That would have been perfect. But again, hindsight. So I lined up the large stamp again in my platform. And because it's so big, it kind of has to go on an angle here, but that's fine. I'm just going to line up each envelope flap with the stamp because I just want to stamp this on the flap of each envelope and nowhere else. So I'm going to use my anti-static powder tool, and I'm going to stamp that stamp with the Simon clear embossing ink, and then heat emboss it with the same embossing powder that I used on the card base. And that just, brings it all together. You've got this gorgeous, shimmery coordinating envelope with the heat embossing. It just, made for a complete finishing touch here. So with all of these, again, I let my heat tool heat up. You need to be careful when you're heat embossing on the flap because these are all self-adhesive ones. So you want to make sure that you don't overheat them and melt that adhesive too much. Thankfully, there's like a little, removable strip that you peel off before you actually seal the envelope. So each time I just lined up the stamp, and yeah, this one, the metallic copper envelope with Simon's rose gold embossing powder is just the most gorgeous thing ever. Love. Seriously love. So did that all 4 times with all 4 envelopes using all 4 embossing powders. And like I said, this like random teal sort of colored envelope, you can see it when I pair it with the card. It does not match at all. It really bothers me. I would use the silver envelope with the silver. Oh, the silver envelope with silver embossed powder would look gorgeous as well. And then this metallic cornflower blue with the gold looks absolutely fabulous. And of course, this one matches the cornflower cardstock perfectly. So that's going to finish off this card set. I will have pictures here at the end of the video, and pictures, they'll also be posted on my blog. I will have links, like I said, to the kit, and then links to everything individually that will be in the description box below the video, as well as on my blog. So check that out below if you are interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.